Well, folks, Epic Universe is finally here. After several years of waiting, of anticipation, this park has finally opened to the public, and Universal, let me tell you, has delivered the goods. But here's the thing, folks. We always knew, even from the very moment this park was announced, we knew this park was going to be innovative. We knew it was going to do things differently. We knew that Universal was thinking outside the box with this park. But let me tell you, folks, you are not truly prepared or fully understand just how different and unique this park is until you step foot through those entryway gates. And though to be clear, I do mean different in a good way, heck, maybe even a great way. Let's us not make the mistake of saying this park is perfect. It is far from it. Heck, there's no theme park in the world that's perfect, but Epic Universe is certainly no exception to that rule. There are several mistakes, several missteps, several flaws that were put into this park, many of which, Universal, in all fairness, could not have foreseen. However, there are many that not only could they have anticipated, but really they should have anticipated, and there's really no reason or excuse for why those issues could not have been addressed before issuing out the final product here. And you may assume that where those errors, where those missteps sort of arise, would be from the core of the park, which is, of course, the rides. That is the core, that is the central of any theme park's offerings. That is really what ties the whole product together. So you may assume that when I say that Epic Universe has made mistakes, that Epic Universe has errors and has missteps, you may think that it comes at the cost of the quality of these attractions. But let me tell you, folks, from a quality perspective, Universal knocked it out of the park. It is a grand slam. It is a home run. It is send everybody around the bases because Epic Universe did not skimp out on quality whatsoever. From Monsters Unchained to Stardust Racers to Mario Kart to Minecart Madness to Harry Potter and the Battle of the Ministry and Hiccup's Wing Gliders, let me tell you, folks, any of the rides I just mentioned, you could pretty much plop down in any other theme park in Orlando, and they would stand to be a top 5, heck, maybe even a top 3 ride at any of those theme parks. That's how good this ride lineup is. Believe it. Heck, even the rides that are subpar, the rides that aren't really all that great, are at least delivering something new and bringing something new to the table for the Universal Orlando Resort, or just for Orlando in general. They're doing something different that we haven't really seen before and are adding variety to Universal's offerings. And this does apply to those really high quality rides as well. Every single ride at this park is bringing something new to the table and adding variety and value to the Universal Orlando Resort. And this is even true for the rides that are obviously derivative of previous Universal rides and attractions. Heck, Monsters Unchained uses the same ride system as Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. By all accounts, it shouldn't really be all that much different of a ride. Heck, just look at Spider-Man versus Transformers. Transformers really doesn't bring that much new to the table, though it is a really good and fun ride. It's not doing anything super innovative or different than what Spider-Man did before, and I think many people would even say Spider-Man is still the better ride to this day. But Monsters Unchained does something very different and unique than what Transformers did when it adapted and became derivative of Spider-Man. As Monsters Unchained takes every single flaw, every single error, every single issue that Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey had and addresses it head on. Of course, the number one flaw with Forbidden Journey is the fact that it makes a lot of people nauseous. It creates a lot of motion sickness. And this becomes a problem basically because of two issues. One is the screens, these dome screens that follow you around in your cart. That ultimately causes a lot of motion sickness. Plus, the movements in the cart can be pretty intense. There's one moment in the ride with the Whomping Willow where you're basically being sent out the back of the vehicle. You go upside down and you're getting pushed the other direction. It's a pretty intense amount of movement on this attraction. And Monsters Unchained, despite being perhaps more intimidating sort of subject matter, actually has a less intense movement of the vehicle and a way less reliance on screens, with animatronics providing much of the action and screens basically being used as more of a tool in the background as opposed to being the main feature, resulting in a ride that really shouldn't make much of anybody particularly nauseous. Not only making for a more accessible ride, but also just a generally better ride experience overall. And then you have Hiccup's Wing Gliders, which, folks, once you've ridden it, you'll know right away that, yeah, this is derivative of Hagrid's over in Islands of Adventure. And I mean, listen, that's a great ride to take inspiration from, no doubt about it. But could Hiccup's Wing Gliders really turn out better than Hagrid's? The answer is no. It's not a better ride than Hagrid's, at least not in my humble opinion. However, and this is a really big however, the fact of the matter is that Hiccup's Wing Gliders is able to achieve something that Hagrid set out to do and failed to do so. If you recall, the marketing campaign surrounding Hagrid's called it a family roller coaster. At the end of the day, Universal, after building Gringotts, after building Forbidden Journey, they were looking for an attraction that could actually be accessible to all audiences, be a ride that the whole family can enjoy. Ultimately, they failed in that endeavor. The ride is far too intense with the speed and number of launches, and the fact that you go backwards for a substantial period of time, and of course, the fact that there is a drop track on this. It ultimately is too intense of an experience to be a true family-friendly attraction. But similar to what Universal did with Monsters Unchained, Universal looked at what happened with Hagrid, said, okay, where did we go too far? Where were our mistakes in trying to turn that into a family-friendly roller coaster only to make it too thrilling? And where can we tone it down for Hiccup's Wing Gliders? And that's exactly what they did. They were successful in creating an actually family-friendly roller coaster, something that Hagrid's desperately tried to pull off, but came up short. But let me tell you, folks, this throttling of intensity, this ambition to make a more family-friendly attraction does not at all come at the cost of the quality of the attraction, at least not too much. It certainly doesn't come at the cost of the storytelling aspect. It doesn't come at the cost of the theming. Heck, they even went ahead and made it interactive with the land itself, something that Hagrid obviously wasn't even going to be allowed to do, as it would break the immersion of the wizarding world of Harry Potter, something that Universal, with a property like How to Train Your Dragon, would gladly be able to do, allowing a roller coaster to run straight through the land, making for a great kinetic element for some people walking through the land, but certainly also makes for a great moment when riding the attraction. And before I move on here, I would be remiss to not mention the two shows throughout this theme park. I mean, they are both incredibly technologically advanced and complex. It's absurd. Not only are they entertaining, but they're doing a lot from a tech standpoint that, quite frankly, we haven't really seen in sit-down shows at theme parks up to this point. I mean, if you think that the Bourne Stuntacular over at Studios is impressive from a technological standpoint, these two shows take it to a whole nother level, so much so that the first time I watched both shows, the shows broke down when I watched them. That's right, a show broke down. That should tell you everything you need to know about the complexity of what's going on in these shows. But basically, this is all to say that the rides, the attractions in this park, they're all winners in my book, at least in some way, shape, or form. And that brings me on to the next sort of subject matter about this park, which is just the guest pathways, right? The atmosphere, walking through these lands and through the main hub of this park, Celestial Park. I mean, let me tell you, folks, the park is beautiful. It is wonderful to walk around. There are so many details, so many beautiful views, sights. I mean, the amount of detail, the theming everywhere is top notch. And really, the cherry on top here, the bow that ties everything together, is the scale. I mean, everything is so grand, everything is so massive. It's honestly kind of mind-boggling when you see it. I mean, heck, just looking at the Ministry of Magic land, it makes Diagon Alley look like it's a miniature playset. Every building in the Paris part of this land is massive. And then not to mention, of course, that once you enter into the Ministry of Magic itself, I mean, holy cow, it is a jaw-dropping moment every time you see it. And then the kinetics of both How to Train Your Dragon and Super Nintendo World are on a level I don't think we've ever seen before. I mean, Super Nintendo World's kinetics are so overwhelming. There is so much going on, so much moving. I mean, your mind can't even process it, honestly. Like, once you enter outside of Cinderella Castle, excuse me, I'm leaving that in, Peach's Castle, you are just absolutely blown away by what you see in front of you. Your mind just cannot compute everything that is moving. I mean, it's actually absurd. And while I'm on the subject of talking about the lands of this park, let me just address the elephant in the room that's been talked about 1,000 times. That being the lack of shade in this park. I get it, okay? Yeah, lack of shade in Orlando, that's sacrilege, that's absurd, that's a really bad idea. But let me just put it this way, folks. Should they improve it? Yes. Can they improve it? Yes. Will they improve it? Yes. Okay, conversation done. Done and dusted. We don't need to spend any more time talking about this, okay? They're gonna fix the issue. They're gonna put in more areas to get shade. The trees are gonna grow up. Best believe there will be more shade as time goes on in this park. They're not gonna let sleeping dogs lie with that one. But I have to say, by and large, with the exception of the lack of shade, these lands are not only tremendously well themed and detailed, but they're so enjoyable to just spend time in. I mean, you could spend literally almost your entire day in these lands, just walking around, looking at the details, and admiring the art that's been put in front of you. That is how great these lands are and how well they've been constructed. But here's a fact, Jack. If you've listened to any other review of this theme park, then everything I've said up to this point shouldn't come as too much of a shock, right? It should sound fairly familiar to you. At least I'm assuming. I've honestly avoided pretty much any other review up to this point to not have my opinions be influenced. So maybe I've said some outrageous stuff. I'm just assuming this is what everyone thinks. But what I do think people maybe are missing the forest for the trees is when it comes to the issues of this park, the flaws of this park. Now, I know a lot of people have admitted that the park has issues, of course, but I think a lot of people are looking very surface level, as there are a number of different kinds of mistakes that Universal made when creating Epic Universe. Now, the mistakes that are the most obvious and are the most front and center for guests are the mistakes that Universal made because of over-ambition. Now, let me tell you folks, these kind of mistakes are the best kind of mistakes you could possibly make, at least in my book. I'll forgive you all day for making a mistake that is because you simply had such grand ambitions and such grand goals for a new ride, land, or attraction that, I mean, I'll gladly forgive you because it's that innovation that pushes theme parks forward. And when it works, when that risk pays off, oh, it's a beautiful thing. And we saw in this park already how many times that risk did pay off dividends for Universal. But unfortunately, when you're trying to break the mold and do something new with pretty much every single piece of this park, you're bound to make some missteps and do some things wrong. And the primary result of this, or at least the most obvious result of this, is when you have rides that don't quite work or aren't particularly reliable. We've seen already Harry Potter and the Battle at the Ministry has had a ton of issues with uptime. Heck, the ride didn't even open until like midday on opening day, and a ton of people who went ahead and rope dropped it in the beginning of the day missed out on some fantastically low wait times in the rest of the park simply because they were trapped waiting for that ride to reopen. But it isn't just Battle at the Ministry. In fact, most rides at this park have gone through their fair share of issues. And you may be saying, okay, well, that's no big deal, right? Rides go down all the time, but the problem is that this park does not have a ton of rides to begin with, only 11. So when one or two high capacity rides, those people eater rides, go down, it has a cascading effect on wait times throughout the rest of the park. I mean, there was one day where Battle at the Ministry and Monsters Unchained were both on delay, and as a result, the wait times exploded throughout the rest of the park, even though attendance at the park that day was still relatively mild, all things considered. And though you may get unlucky with a bad day like that, where ride delays and breakdowns sort of sour your day, ultimately, I don't think this is a huge issue, at least, in the grand scheme of things, simply because it is just a short-term issue, or at least it should be, because as time goes on, Universal should be able to sort of crack down on the reliability issues of these attractions and get them running a whole lot more smoother. I think where the real test with this comes is how do they go about making these rides more reliable? The way I see it, there's really two approaches to making a ride more reliable. You can either go the Hagrid's route, or you can go the Rise of the Resistance route. With Hagrid, we know that ride opened with horrible capacity and reliability. I mean, that's how you get a 10-hour wait on opening day, because ultimately they weren't able to get anywhere near as many trains on the track as they had originally anticipated when they built the ride, meaning it didn't have the capacity to meet anywhere close to the amount of demand that ride, being a Harry Potter ride, would ultimately command, and why so many years later, this ride still posts super high wait times. And ultimately, when Rise of the Resistance opened up at Disney's Hollywood Studios, it went through a very similar phase. Now, it wasn't anywhere near as terrible as Hagrid's, but it also had way less capacity than what Disney had initially anticipated, and also had a ton of effects that were really unreliable, causing the ride to break down quite often. And you know what? I'm pleased to say that both Disney and Universal have gotten these two rides to be way more reliable and have much more effective capacity today than they did on opening day, which is a huge win. However, both parks went about it in very different ways. Disney, with Rise of the Resistance, in order to get that ride to be more reliable and have more throughput, ultimately turned off permanently a bunch of effects throughout that ride experience, many of which have still not returned to this day. This lowered the complexity of the ride and lowered the amount of moving pieces, meaning that there was less of a chance of something breaking down and causing the ride to go down as a whole, thus ruining its reliability and operating efficiency. And though this strategy is quick and easy and cheap to do, quite frankly, it also comes at the cost of the ride experience and the original vision that the Imagineers or Universal Creative had for the attraction. However, what Universal did for Hagrid, another ride that is super complex and has a ton of moving pieces and a ton of areas that could obviously cause problems for the attraction, instead of getting rid of anything or toning down anything, they simply worked super hard to improve the capacity of the attraction. Heck, several years after the opening of the ride, they went ahead and built a massive maintenance bay behind this thing in order to be able to not only maintain the trains on track better, but also to be able to get more trains on the track on a more consistent basis, thus improving the overall capacity. And we can see it in the wait time that there has been a consistent dip in the wait time over the years, despite the fact that it's still just as popular as it was on the day that it opened. It's undeniable that Universal's strategy with Hagrid's is the complete opposite of Disney's Rise of the Resistance strategy, because this is extremely expensive, extremely time consuming, but it preserves the quality of the attraction. So the question is, when we're talking about Monsters Unchained that has a ton of animatronics that don't necessarily run on a consistent basis, or Battle of the Ministry that consistently goes down, what is going to be the strategy from Universal in addressing the reliability issues of these attractions going forward? That is the question. If they go the Hagrid route, we're eating good. Yes, it's going to take a while for these issues to be resolved, but when they are, these rides are going to be running at tip-top shape in exactly the way that Universal envisioned that they would. If they go the Rise of the Resistance route, then all of a sudden this park may be not looking quite as good as it did on opening day. So the issues that have arisen due to Universal's own ambition, I'm really not too worried about them in the short term. I'm not too concerned about them, but the long term, depending on what strategy Universal employs, that is where the real test is going to take place. And this brings me to Universal's second set of mistakes, as these ones are actually going to be a little bit harder to address, believe it or not, in the long term. And these are mistakes that were at the result of short-sightedness. These are the mistakes that really should not have happened, right? Should have been easy to spot, but ultimately Universal was so focused on theming and details and their high-quality attractions that these kind of fell through the cracks and got kind of forgotten about as they're sort of givens at most existing theme parks, so you don't really think about them when you're building a new one. One thing we already mentioned is the lack of shade. I mean, this is Orlando. It's sunny a lot, and the sun could be, very strong. How do you not build in shade to this park? It should have been top of the list. And it's not to say that, they completely forgot to put in shade to this park, but I think that there was sort of an anticipation or a belief that what they were doing would ultimately result in shade being added to the park, and it just didn't really end up playing out that way. And as a result, now you have a park that doesn't have shade in many spots throughout it. The good news is, though, with that is that can be resolved rather quickly, as we mentioned earlier. However, there is one thing about the way this park was built that cannot be quickly and easily fixed. Heck, it may even never be able to be fixed, and that has to do with the guest pathways in this park. I mean, I talked about how you could spend all day if you wanted to in each of these lands because there's so much to see and do. But personally, I would never spend all day in Super Nintendo World. The pathways in that land are so narrow, they are so cramped, they get so crowded. It is not a fun or particularly enjoyable land to walk around. It can be miserable. Even on opening day, the first time I visited this park, on one of the deadest days this park will ever face in its history because they limited the capacity so much, Super Nintendo World still felt crowded. It still felt cramped. The pathways are so unbelievably narrow, it's just not fun to be in. It's just not. Combine that with the fact that there is absolutely no shade in here, similar to other parts of the park, added in with this colored sort of pavement that you're walking on, and it could be an absolute hot box in that land. I could completely understand that they wanted to conserve space and really maximize the amount of space they had when building Super Nintendo World. I completely get it. But, dude, if it's already a challenge to walk through that land when capacity is capped and kept at a low standard, I cannot even imagine come the peak times of year, winter break, spring break, President's Day weekend. Oh my God, that land is going to be an absolute nightmare to walk through. And here's the thing, even if they expand Super Nintendo World into that expansion pad right next to it, it's not going to change the fact that the existing pathways are narrow, and there's really nothing Universe can do about it at this point. They're screwed. It's gonna be narrow, and it's gonna stay narrow for pretty much the rest of the existence of this land. So that's really an unfortunate misstep by Universal there. But I will give them their flowers where it's due. I mean, How to Train Your Dragon, that land is spread out. It is built wonderfully. The pathways are super wide. It is a sprawling land. That's a land you really can spend all day in because you're never going to have to face any sort of meaningful crowds when walking through that land. There's always going to be space available for you to get your elbow room in. It is not going to be an issue at all in that land. That land is absolutely wonderful. But I will say, because of how big and spread out How to Train Your Dragon is, it does make Dark Universe and Harry Potter and the Ministry of Magic do kind of seem like rather small lands. It's insane to say because you compare Dark Universe and Ministry of Magic to lands, say, at the existing Universal parks. They blow them out of the water in acreage, but they kind of feel small when you're comparing them to How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know. This is probably just like a subconscious thing on my part, but I'm fully anticipating that once Ministry of Magic and Dark Universe do get expanded, which they are anticipated to do, they both have expansion pads available to them, that those lands will both feel like more full-fledged lands on the same level as How to Train Your Dragon. But yeah, in the case of Super Nintendo World, unlike Dark Universe and Harry Potter that over time can have, their issues, quote-unquote, be resolved, I just don't think there's any saving Super Nintendo World. I think that land was poorly constructed from a guest pathway perspective, and I think, honestly, that land is always going to be sort of a get in, do what you need to do, and get out as quickly as possible land, at least for me. And that brings me to my last set of mistakes that I believe that Universal made with Epic Universe. And these ones are honestly the most frustrating because they are not mistakes because Universal was trying to do something new and exciting. They are not mistakes that can hopefully over time be rectified, right? And are issues just in the short term? No. These are repeated mistakes that Universal has made in their past and should have learned from, and has repeated them here once again in Epic Universe and has fallen for those traps for another time. Though these types of mistakes are frustrating and somewhat disappointing to see as a fan, I have to say it's understandable, and I'll show Universal some grace with this because, hey, you're building a brand new theme park. There's not been a new theme park of this scale built in North America in nearly 25 years. And the last time that Universal Orlando did it was back in 1999. So I completely understand, more or less, majority of your team was not around in 1999 when you opened that theme park. So you do not have that same sort of experience under your belt of opening a new theme park. For most of the employees at Universal Creative who were building and opening this new theme park, ultimately, they don't have experience opening a new theme park. So I completely understand it. But at the same time, it is really kind of shocking, actually, that these sort of mistakes would fall through the cracks. You see, folks, you may not have realized it, but when Universal was designing Epic Universe, they followed an existing playbook that was already laid out for them. They literally copied someone else's homework. And whose homework was that, you may be asking? Well, it was Islands of Adventure, right? I mentioned it before. That was the last major theme park that Universal opened in Orlando as well as North America. And to be honest, it's a pretty good choice to sort of copy and paste from, because Islands of Adventure, not only is it one of arguably the best theme parks operating in North America and or the world today, but even at opening, it actually had one of the most successful theme park openings perhaps we've ever seen from any theme park in the modern age, at least from an operational standpoint. Now, it was actually notoriously a bit of a disaster because nobody showed up in its opening year because they did a horrible job of marketing it. But from an operational standpoint, this park was ready for opening day. It didn't face that much downtime or delays or breakdowns with rides, and they had plenty of capacity to meet the demand. So honestly, it was a great park for Universal to go ahead and sort of build the foundation of Epic Universe on top of. After all, when you as a company forget how to build a new theme park, why not just turn to what worked before? And this is evident when looking at the attraction count of Epic Universe and Islands of Adventure. They are shockingly similar. I mean, Islands of Adventure only opened with one more ride and one more show than what Epic Universe is open with here, clearly indicating that Universal was aiming to sort of achieve the same sort of capacity that Islands of Adventure was delivering on opening day. But here's the thing, Universal Orlando Resort is on a completely different level than it was when Islands of Adventure opened back in 1999. The resort has way more attendance. There are way more eyes on it. We're now in the social media age. The theme park industry as a whole has grown drastically over the last few decades. So how are we going to sit here and say that, oh yeah, Epic Universe can go ahead and have the same amount of capacity as Islands of Adventure on opening day and still be successful? I mean, when you think about it that way, it doesn't really make much sense why Universal would go ahead and carbon copy Islands of Adventure's sort of attraction lineup strategy when you think about it in that regard. However, you have to consider this, that when Islands of Adventure opened on opening day, we mentioned it earlier, it ran smooth as butter because they had actually over-prepared for the amount of crowds coming in. They overbuilt the park for the anticipated amount of attendance. And it was even better for them because obviously less people showed up than they even anticipated. So it was a really smooth opening. But the thing is that Universal overbuilt the heck out of Islands of Adventure because of how disastrous the opening of Universal Studios Florida was just 9 years earlier. Keep in mind that a lot of the people who had designed and opened that theme park were still on Universal's team 9 years later when they opened Islands of Adventure. So they had experience. And the opening of Universal Studios Florida was still fresh in their minds. And that was not only an operational disaster, as on opening day, pretty much nothing really worked. There were a ton of rides that never opened, some rides that only opened for a little bit and were sporadically open, and the only real ride that actually stayed open for most of the day was E.T. which might explain why it's still the only one still standing. But yeah, I mean, they had to give out refunds like crazy, and it was horrible public news for them that really kind of hurt them in the opening years and almost sort of sent them down the drain if it wasn't for Back to the Future the Ride and other additions in the years after opening, sort of saving them. So with the opening of Islands of Adventure, Universal wanted to avoid that sort of opening at all costs. Thus why they overbuilt the park. They built in more capacity than what was needed, more things to do than what was needed, simply so that they didn't have to go through the same hell once again. But when it comes to Epic Universe, we're now 26 years later. Universal's attendance has more than doubled in that time span. There are more eyes in this park than ever before because of the additions like Harry Potter and Velocicoaster and all the other amazing things they've done really over the last 15 years or so that have put them on a pedestal similar to that of Disney. Simply put, a new theme park by Universal in Orlando has a much higher attendance expectation in its first year than Islands of Adventure did in 1999. There's no debate about it. So not only how do you think that it would be a good idea to build a similar amount of attractions to what Islands of Adventure had opening, but to even build less attractions than what it had opening? That just seems like a recipe for disaster. And here's the thing, folks. I know we haven't really seen it yet. The crowds have not been that bad. The lines have not been that bad, unless you've gone on a day where there's been a lot of ride delays and breakdowns and or you've had bad weather. Otherwise, it's been pretty smooth sailing up to this point. But the bottom line is, folks, is that we're already seeing several hour-plus long waits throughout this park during an average time of year. The summer is an average time of year attendance-wise for these Orlando parks. Just wait until we hit the peak times. Wait until Columbus Day weekend. Wait until winter break. Wait until President's Day weekend. Wait until spring break. I don't know if this park's going to be able to hold on. I don't know if it's going to be able to handle the amount of guests coming in, to be quite frank. I think both Universal and the guests visiting during that time are going to be in for a rude awakening, as this park is really going to be torn apart at the seams simply because it doesn't have enough to do and does not have nearly enough capacity, which is being compounded by rides like Battle at the Ministry not being operating at their highest possible capacity at the moment. And if they're going through ride delays and breakdowns at this point, or facing really bad weather, oh my god, forget about it. This park's going to be an absolute nightmare to visit. Simply put, folks, whereas Islands of Adventure was an over-preparation for the anticipated crowds, Epic Universe could be argued to be an under-preparation for the crowds that this park will have to face. Sure, on an average day, it holds on well enough, but I'm telling you, man, once the peak crowds come, this is going to be a problem. And maybe it wouldn't be that big of a problem if Universal had some kickers in the wing. I mean, just look at Islands of Adventure. They weren't satisfied with 12 rides and 3 shows. No, they put their pedal to the metal, and the next year, 2000, they opened 2 new rides, Storm Force Acceleratron and the Flying Unicorn. They added more things to do, more capacity just a year after the park opened. Epic Universe is not going to have any new rides or shows opening in 2026. There's nothing in the works. The only thing they have is, a new restaurant or 2. That's not going to help with capacity. Honestly, even the thought of something coming by 2027 seems like a far cry, a far stretch of the imagination to think that Universal could have something open even by then. So this current capacity that the park has, though it will slowly but surely improve over time as these rides sort of get more and more efficient and become more reliable, ultimately, it's not going to be enough to handle guests during the peak seasons at the very least. And I've alluded to it a few times earlier, but yes, also when there is poor weather, when there is thunderstorms, which happen almost daily in Orlando, this park basically shuts down by and large. And this is another thing they actually took straight out of Islands of Adventure's playbook. Lord knows why, because even to this day, Islands of Adventure is perhaps the worst park to visit during a thunderstorm. There is nothing open. But it was even worse on opening day. On opening day, they only had 2 rides alongside the 3 shows that would run during thunderstorms. That being The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man and Cat in the Hat. And believe it or not, Universal basically copied that formula. Now, yes, they have 4 rides that can run during thunderstorms, which is fantastic, but you still have one less show. So overall attractions, you're only looking at one more attraction that can run during thunderstorms. Meaning there isn't really much to do here, and the rides that are open have insane wait times. Similar to the shade issue, you really gotta wonder, did whoever designed this park know where it was being built? Like, did we forget what Orlando's weather looks like? Like, it's really kind of shocking, honestly. And you know what else is shocking, but also kind of disappointing, is the fact that, like we said, these are mistakes Universal made before. These were mistakes that were made with Universal Studios Florida not having enough things to do, not having enough capacity, or made with Islands of Adventure having too few attractions available to be open during a thunderstorm. How do you make these same faults again when they were such drastic issues that plagued those parks at opening? And in the case of Islands of Adventure, with the lack of rides that can run during thunderstorms, is still an issue to this day. And I kind of feel like I'm actually at this point beating up Epic Universe too much at this point. I mean, let me make it clear really quick here. I love this park. This park is amazing. I said it before. From a quality perspective, it's about as good as you could have possibly hoped for. But from an operational standpoint, from a sort of a design and planning standpoint, I mean, they really kind of missed the mark. And when we look back at this number, comparing the amount of attractions between IOA and Epic Universe, one thing that we're forgetting here is to look at the actual attractions themselves. Ultimately, I think it could be argued that the 12 rides at Islands of Adventure actually had better capacity than the 11 rides at Epic Universe. Not by a small margin, but by quite a lot. I mean, rides like Dueling Dragons, Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man, these rides have absurd capacity and had them from day one. I'm not really convinced that other than Monsters Unchained and maybe Mario Kart, that this park really has much in the way of people eaters as things stand today. I'm sure eventually they're hoping Battle at the Ministry can be a people eater, but at the moment it is not moving that much capacity per hour in order to be contributing in that fashion. But let me just say this, in spite of all these mistakes, missteps, misfires, whatever you want to call them, this park, Epic Universe, is an undeniable victory for Universal. Okay, yes, they made mistakes, some pretty big ones, some small ones, some in between, but the bottom line is they nailed the parts that really matter the most, which is the quality of the atmosphere, the quality of the rides, the quality of the shows, and I think they just really built an unbelievably solid foundation for this park to be built on for years to come. I mean, think about it this way, folks. For all that I've criticized this park about throughout this video, the bottom line is, in its opening state, it is already a better theme park than Hollywood Studios and Animal Kingdom. That is shocking. Those are two parks that have been around for 20, 30 plus years and still haven't figured out half the things that Epic Universe has gotten right. In spite of all of its shortcomings, it is far from a failure or a flop. No, it's honestly kind of like a Picasso painting. It looks messed up, right? You know, it's got some weird decisions being made there, but it still is beautiful, right? It still has got a lot going on under the surface. And even though this park has plenty of painful days ahead of it, best believe that this is arguably one of the best, if not straight up the best, foundation for a brand new theme park we have ever seen in the modern age. I don't know, I can't even think of another one that's honestly set itself up for success more right from the get-go than Epic Universe has here, in spite of all the errors that they ultimately made along the way to achieve greatness. Universal should be proud of what they've made here. It's a huge win, not only for them, but for theme parks everywhere. And I barely even mentioned it because it wasn't super relevant to this video, but I went on opening day and that was arguably one of the best theme park days I've ever had in my life. So you know what, Epic Universe, I love you already. I could kiss you 10,000 times. And you know what, folks, if you want to hear about Universal Orlando's second greatest ever creation from day one, then click the video on your screen right now to hear about Universal Orlando's parking garage. What a segue. Anyways, I'll see y'all next time. Peace.